The room was quiet, the kind of silence that presses in from all sides, thick with dust and forgotten memories. I sat on the floor, knees bent, as I sifted through a box of my mother's things. Old letters, faded trinkets, a cracked porcelain figurine. The afternoon sun filtered weakly through the curtains, casting long shadows that stretched across the carpet like fingers reaching for something lost. Then, beneath a stack of yellowed papers, I found it. A photograph, edges curled and worn, the kind you almost hesitate to touch for fear of breaking what little remained. I picked it up slowly, the surface cool beneath my fingertips, and as I held it closer, the image began to unfold in my mind. There it was, my childhood home, frozen in a moment I thought I'd buried deep. The living room, the furniture, the peeling wallpaper, everything exactly as I remembered it from that day. My eyes traced the familiar lines of the window frame, the pattern of the rug beneath the coffee table. And then, in the corner of the frame, a small boy sat quietly me. The sight of that younger self, so vulnerable and unaware, sent a strange ache through my chest. But what made my breath catch, what made my hands tremble and my heart slam against my ribs, was the figure standing inside the room. A woman, young, composed, and yet utterly familiar. Her gaze was fixed on the camera, steady and unyielding. It took a moment, a breath too long, for the realization to strike me like lightning. It was her, the woman I married. Younger, yes, but unmistakably her. My mind recoiled, unable to piece together the impossible. The years of comfort and love shattered in an instant. A scent, a delicate perfume I hadn't smelled in years, rose in my memory. The low, calm voice I thought I'd forgotten. The silhouette that haunted the edges of my childhood recollections. The one my father refused to speak about. They collided, crashing into one another until the truth was unbearable, raw, and undeniable. My hands shook as I gripped the photograph tighter, the corners digging into my skin. The room tilted, the air thickened, and my own breathing sounded loud and strange in the stillness. Then, from down the hallway, I heard the soft, steady footsteps, her footsteps, calm and familiar. I remained frozen, the photo clutched in my hands, as the sound drew closer. It was as if she already knew that I had finally seen. That moment stretched between us like a fragile thread, each heartbeat echoing louder than the last. When she appeared at the doorway, the soft light caught the edges of her face, familiar yet somehow distant, as if time had shifted around us without either of us noticing. I wanted to speak, to explain the flood of questions racing through my mind, but the words tangled on my tongue. Instead, I simply held up the photograph, letting the silence do the talking. Her eyes flickered with a mix of recognition and something deeper. Regret, maybe, or relief. It's strange how a single image can unravel so many hidden stories, isn't it? Moments like these make me realize how much we all carry beneath the surface. Unspoken truths, memories we're not ready to face, and emotions that refuse to settle quietly. I wonder if you've ever had a moment like this, where something small suddenly reshapes everything you thought you knew. So, I'd love to hear about it. Sharing these experiences doesn't just connect us. It helps us understand the complexity of what it means to be human. So, if this story has touched something inside you, please leave a comment below. Your thoughts, your feelings, your own stories, they matter here. They create a space where we can all reflect and grow together. And if you find yourself drawn into this unfolding journey, consider giving the video a like. It's not just a click. It's a way to show that these moments and stories resonate, that you want to see more of them come to life. Plus, subscribing means you won't miss what's coming next. Because, believe me, there's a lot more beneath the surface waiting to be uncovered. It's like walking through these rooms side by side, discovering the truth one step at a time. So, stay with me, keep your eyes open, and let's see where this leads. After Mom died, the house changed in ways I couldn't quite name back then, but I felt them deep inside. The silence was the first thing I noticed, thick, heavy, like a shadow that swallowed every sound. No more laughter echoing down the hallway, no more soft humming from the kitchen, No more footsteps light enough to guess where she was. Just quiet. And in that quiet, I found myself shrinking, retreating into a place where the memories of that day, the day everything shifted, couldn't reach me. I don't remember much about the moment she left us. Not because I was too young or because time blurred it naturally, but because I trained myself not to remember. Like a reflex, I pushed away the woman's face, her voice, the scent of her perfume. I worked hard to erase the details, as if by doing so I could make the pain smaller, less real. The memory came in fragments, snatches of panic, the way the house felt colder than it had ever been, and a sharp, overwhelming numbness that settled over me like a second skin. But the face, the voice, the smell, all of that I folded away and locked deep inside, because facing them was unbearable. Dad became a ghost in the house after that. He didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't even talk much. Instead, he shut down, retreating behind a wall of silence that was almost harder to bear than the loss itself. I learned early on to read the space between his words, to understand that his quiet wasn't peace. It was a fortress built out of grief and helplessness. He was there, but not really. We moved through the days like strangers sharing the same roof, connected only by the invisible thread of what we had lost. Loneliness became my constant companion. It wasn't the kind of loneliness you can fix with a phone call or a friend's visit. It was the hollow ache of being emotionally starved, of craving something I didn't even know how to name. Safety, comfort, someone to make the chaos inside me make sense. I became an expert at avoiding the questions, the conversations, the moments when the past threatened to break through. Talking about that day was like stepping onto thin ice. I learned to sidestep it, to fill the silence with anything else. In this self-imposed silence, I grew up differently from other kids. While they leaned on their parents, I learned to lean on myself, sometimes so hard I almost broke. The loneliness taught me to be cautious, to hold back pieces of myself, to brace for the worst. But it also left me hungry in a way that no childhood should be. Hungry for warmth, for stability, for someone who could hold me steady when the world spun out of control. That hunger shaped who I became as an adult, the kind of person who clings tightly to anyone who offers even a glimpse of the comfort I missed for so long. When I finally met her, my future wife, it wasn't just attraction or luck. It was the quiet desperation of a child's longing grown into a man's need. I was vulnerable, yes, but also hopeful in a way I hadn't dared to be before. Because after years of silence and shadows, the idea of someone willing to stay, to listen, to care, it was almost impossible to resist. Looking back now, I see how those years of silence and avoidance carved the paths my heart would follow. They made me cautious, yes, but also fiercely determined to never feel that alone again. And maybe, in the end, that's what brought me to her. The unspoken promise that no matter what, I wouldn't have to face the silence alone anymore. The years before I met her felt like a slow, endless loop, a series of days marked by the same quiet emptiness. I'd wake up, go through the motions at work, come home to an apartment that echoed too loudly, and then do it all over again. My routines were so rigid that they almost felt like a shield, a way to keep the world at bay. I'd tell myself that keeping busy was enough, that filling the hours with tasks and meetings would somehow keep the loneliness from sinking in, but it never worked. The silence always found me at night, when the noise died down and the weight of everything settled in my chest. Relationships came and went, but none of them ever broke through the distance I kept carefully built around myself. I wasn't someone who shared easily. Vulnerability felt like a dangerous risk I wasn't willing to take. I'd let people get close enough to see a surface version of me, but never close enough to really know what was underneath. It was easier to keep everyone at arm's length, to avoid the messy, complicated parts that scared me most. Maybe I was afraid they'd see the cracks, the parts one hadn't even admitted to myself. Or maybe I just didn't trust anyone enough to let them in. Either way, it left me feeling more alone than ever. Underneath it all was a grief I never really faced. My mother's death was a wound that never quite healed, and I'd buried it deep, pretending it wasn't there. I never gave myself the chance to grieve properly, to say goodbye in a way that felt real. That loss was like a hollow space inside me, a part of myself I couldn't fill no matter how hard I tried. It was this absence I carried with me, the invisible weight that made me feel like something was always missing. I didn't know how to close that chapter, so I just kept it open, locked away in the corners of my mind where no one could find it. By the time she came along, I was exhausted, emotionally raw and secretly desperate, even if I didn't fully realize it. It was like I'd been wandering through a fog for so long that the idea of someone who could see me, really see me, felt almost unbelievable. I wanted someone who could understand the silence I lived in, who wouldn't be scared by the shadows I carried. I wanted to feel safe enough to finally lower the walls I'd built over the years. And then she appeared, almost effortlessly perfect in the way she fit into the space I'd been holding open without knowing it. Falling for her wasn't a choice. It was something that happened because she seemed to offer exactly what I'd been waiting for. Someone who could be home, even if that feeling was dangerous. She wasn't just another person passing through. She was the possibility of something different, something real. In her presence, the exhaustion softened, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't have to face the silence alone anymore. I remember the first moment I saw her, standing by the window of that little coffee shop where I usually hid from the noise of the city. She wasn't flashy or loud, just quietly there, like she belonged to some other world that I didn't quite understand but desperately wanted to be part of. When she smiled at me, it wasn't just a polite gesture. It was the kind of smile that reaches your bones, the kind that says, "I see you." And that's how our first conversation began. Not with grand declarations or awkward small talk, but with a simple, "Do you mind if I join you?" Her voice was soft but steady, and I found myself nodding before I even knew what I was agreeing to. Talking to her felt like breathing after being underwater for too long. She asked questions that didn't feel intrusive but genuine, the kind that made me stop and think about parts of myself I'd long shoved aside. "What's your story?" she asked once, her eyes steady and patient. I hesitated, then shared a piece of my past I rarely let anyone touch, the way my mother's absence left a hollow space inside me. I was bracing for the usual discomfort or awkward silence, but instead, she reached out and gently touched my arm. That light, steady contact said more than words ever could. She didn't flinch or look away. She stayed right there with me, as if my pain was hers to hold, too. There were nights when the world outside felt too heavy, and she was the only presence that could anchor me. I'd find myself telling her things I'd never said aloud. Fragments of memories, fears I kept locked up tight. She never rushed me or tried to fix me. Sometimes she asked the right question at the right moment, and other times she just listened, letting the silence between us hold all the meaning. It was almost uncanny how she seemed to know exactly when to push me gently toward truths I needed to face and when to simply offer quiet comfort. That balance was rare, and it made me feel like I'd finally found someone who understood the delicate rhythms of my heart. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began filling the empty spaces in my life, the corners that had grown cold and forgotten. Her presence seeped in like sunlight through cracked blinds, softening the edges of loneliness that had become my default state. When she looked at me, I didn't see judgment or fatigue. I saw a steady warmth that felt like home. Her attention wasn't overwhelming or desperate. It was calm and deliberate, like she was choosing to be there with me because she wanted to, not because she needed to. I told myself it was just genuine love, pure and simple because that's what it felt like. In her eyes, I found a reflection of hope I hadn't dared to hold on to before. I didn't notice how perfect everything seemed, how seamlessly she fit into my world, almost too seamlessly. I was too busy basking in the comfort of being truly seen and heard to wonder if maybe, just maybe, something was lurking beneath that perfection. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that I wasn't alone, that someone was there to catch me when I faltered, to carry part of my weight without hesitation. And in that belief, she slowly became the center of my life, the quiet gravity pulling me out of my isolation, making the impossible feel possible. All I wanted was to hold onto that feeling, that fragile thread of connection that made the silence disappear. Somewhere between the comfort of her presence and the quiet moments we shared, I started noticing things, small, almost imperceptible details, that rippled beneath the surface of my calm. It began the evening she came home wearing that perfume again. It wasn't anything loud or cloying, just a soft, powdery scent that clung to her like a second skin. But when it floated through the air, something deep inside me recoiled, like a distant bell tolling faintly in a forgotten corner of my memory. I tried to catch the source of it, to place it somewhere safe, but all I could come up with was a vague, unsettling familiarity. It wasn't unpleasant exactly, but it carried a weight, a shadow I couldn't quite shake. I caught myself freezing for a moment, the hairs rising on my arms as she moved past me, the perfume lingering in the air like a ghost. I swallowed hard, feeling a sudden tightness in my chest, a subtle nausea that pulled at the edges of my calm. But I told myself it was nothing. Maybe it was just a coincidence, or some leftover residue from a long-forgotten smell. She had every right to wear whatever scent she liked. I needed to stop reading into it. I needed to stop listening to my skin when it whispered warnings I couldn't understand. Then there was the way she said certain things, the small phrases that slipped out in casual conversation. One afternoon, we were talking about plans for the weekend, and she said something, an expression, a turn of phrase, that sent a literal chill through me. It was so ordinary, so throwaway, but it echoed with an eerie precision, like a line I'd heard before in a voice I knew too well. My throat tightened, my pulse quickened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I looked at her, searching for a sign that I was imagining things, that it was just a coincidence. She smiled, oblivious, and I forced a laugh, pushing the unease down deep. My body was betraying me, insisting on something I refused to acknowledge. The headaches came next, throbbing in the back of my skull, a dull drumbeat I tried to ignore. Each time she laughed or turned her head in that particular way, or even just sat quietly beside me, the tension coiled tighter, squeezing my chest, tangling my stomach in knots. I felt like I was walking on a thin line between calm and something I didn't want to face, a quiet dread that hovered just out of sight. The most unsettling moment came when I finally brought her to my childhood home. I wanted to share that piece of my past, the place where I was formed, fractured, and somehow survived. She was curious, gentle, and I watched her eyes as she took it all in. The peeling paint, the creaky porch, the overgrown yard. But then her gaze shifted, just for a second, and I saw something there, a flicker of recognition or maybe sorrow that made my skin prick. Her expression tightened in a way I couldn't place, and suddenly the air felt heavier. I felt my hands start to tremble, a cold sweat breaking out along my temples. My stomach churned, and a wave of nausea rose, sharp and unwelcome. But I smiled, tried to steady my voice. "It's not much," I said, "but it's home." She nodded, her eyes softening, but the unease inside me remained, stubborn and unyielding. I wanted to tell myself it was nothing, that these were just coincidences, random echoes of a life that no longer held sway over me. I needed this, needed her. She was the tether to a world where I could breathe, where silence didn't feel like a threat. So I buried the feelings, stuffed them into the darkest corners of my mind, convincing myself that love was stronger than ghosts. But every time I caught that scent again, every time I heard those words, every time I saw her look at that old house, my body reminded me that something was there, a quiet, insistent tremor beneath the surface. And as much as I tried to drown it out, the dread was growing, slow and steady, like a shadow stretching long across the floor. We were standing in the kitchen, the late afternoon sun filtering through the blinds, casting stripes across the floor. She was telling me about her day, her voice light but firm, the way she always had when she was trying to keep things calm between us. I wanted to listen, to respond like I always did, but then she moved, stepped a little closer to the counter the same way my mother used to. It was a small thing, a casual shift in stance, but it cracked something open inside me. Suddenly, I was no longer here. I was back in that old house, the one I hadn't thought about in years. The kitchen smelled the way it used to, the faint, lingering scent of cloves and something floral I couldn't name, but it was there, like a ghost hiding in the corners. The ticking of the wall clock seemed louder, each second pounding in my ears. And then, the sound of raised voices, sharp and desperate, cutting through the stillness. Not hers, not my wife's, but someone else's, older, rougher, filled with anger. She raised her voice now, snapping at me over something trivial, but it wasn't the words that broke through. It was the tone. Harsh, accusing, the kind that felt like a slap. My heart pounded, and the room stretched and warped into the shape of that long-ago kitchen, the one with peeling wallpaper and a narrow doorway leading to the living room. I could see her, my mother, lying on the floor, her hair spread out like a dark halo, eyes wide but unfocused. The sharp metallic scent of blood mixed with the perfume that clung to the woman standing near the doorway, a silhouette I could never quite place before. Now, I see her clearly, tall, confident, the same subtle floral fragrance that I recognize now on my wife's skin. I want to push it away, slam the door on these memories, but they flood in with brutal clarity. The sound of a struggle, the creak of floorboards, the muffled sobs. My child self, so small and scared, frozen with the terrible certainty that something was very wrong. That day was a puzzle with missing pieces I had spent years avoiding, but now the edges are sharp and jagged, cutting into the present. She looks at me, confused, maybe angry that I'm not responding. I want to tell her it's not her, that the woman in my memories is not the woman I love. But the scent, the voice, the way she moves, there is a terrifying overlap I cannot deny. It's like my mind is playing a cruel trick, mixing past and present until I don't know what is real. "I'm here," she says softly, reaching out, but I flinch. The warmth of her hand feels like fire, both comforting and threatening. I want to believe that the woman beside me is nothing like the one in my nightmares, but part of me trembles with fear that they might be one and the same. Remembering is terrifying. It's like standing on a cliff's edge, staring down into a dark abyss, knowing the fall is inevitable but powerless to stop it. Every flashback is a wound reopening. Every scent a summons to a past I have fought so hard to forget. And yet, here I am, trapped between who I want to believe she is and what my memory insists I see. I swallow hard, trying to hold on to the life we've built together, but the walls around my mind are crumbling. The woman I married stands before me, but the ghost of that day clings to her, whispering secrets I'm not ready to hear. And in this moment, I realize that love alone might not be enough to silence the echoes anymore. The drive to the old house felt like moving through a fog I'd been avoiding for years. The road was familiar, every bend and cracked sidewalk stirring memories I tried to lock away. I kept my hands tight on the steering wheel as the neighborhood came into view, untouched by time, yet somehow colder, as if it had been holding its breath all these years, waiting for me to return. The house sat quietly at the end of the street, its paint peeling, windows shuttered, shadows gathering like old regrets. Stepping onto the porch, I hesitated. The worn wooden boards creaked underfoot, the scent of mildew and dust filling the air like a warning. This place held the weight of everything I loved and everything I feared. My mother's laughter, her anger, the silence after she died. I could feel the walls watching me, judging me for leaving, for coming back, for wanting answers I wasn't sure I deserved. Inside, the house was a mausoleum of memories. Faded wallpaper peeled at the corners, and the furniture sagged under years of neglect. But it was the boxes stacked in the corner of what used to be my mother's room that drew me in. Their taped lids yellowed, edges softened by time. I swallowed hard, heart pounding, afraid of what I might find, afraid of what I might confirm. I knelt beside the first box, fingers trembling as I peeled away the tape. Inside were letters, brittle and yellowed, tied with faded ribbons. I ran my fingers over the script, my mother's handwriting, looping, elegant, full of secrets. As I unfolded one letter, the words blurred beneath my racing pulse. They spoke of hope, fear, and a past I'd only glimpsed in nightmares. Box after box, I sifted through photographs, trinkets, and documents. Each item was a shard of a story I'd never fully understood. My mother's life before me, the people she loved, the choices she made. My breath hitched when I found a small, leather-bound journal. Flipping through it, I found entries that whispered of guilt and loss, but no clear answers, only more questions. Then, amid the clutter of papers and faded photographs, I saw it. A photo that stopped me cold. The edges were curled, the black and white image slightly blurred, but unmistakable. It was the house exactly as I remembered it on the day my mother died. But what made my heart slam against my ribs was something else. Something I wasn't prepared to see. In the background, near the edge of the frame, stood a younger woman. Her hair caught the light, her eyes sharp and watching, almost too familiar. I blinked, heart pounding, breath shallow. The face was impossibly familiar. My wife's face years before I ever met her. A cold wave washed over me, and the room seemed to tilt. The photograph trembled in my hand as the pieces I'd tried to keep separate crashed together with brutal clarity. The walls of memory and denial collapsed all at once. In that moment, the tangled knot of love, loss, and suspicion unraveled, leaving me raw and exposed. I looked closer, my voice barely a whisper. How? The question hung in the air, heavy and unresolved, as the truth I dreaded finally stared back at me from the past, etched in silver and shadow on that fragile, fading photograph. The house felt different the moment I stepped in. The familiar creak of the floorboards beneath my feet, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the scent of her perfume lingering faintly in the air. All of it twisted into something strange and cold. I hadn't confronted her yet, couldn't. Not when the image of that photograph burned so fiercely behind my eyes. Instead, I moved through the rooms like a ghost, observing her with a new, uncomfortable sharpness. Dinner was the first test. She set the table quietly, her movements precise, almost rehearsed. I watched her arrange the silverware with a slight tilt, the way she folded the napkin just so, as if control was a shield she was always holding. I sat across from her, the plate of food between us suddenly a chasm. Our conversation was light, trivial, talk about the weather, a new show on TV. But something in the way she watched me made every word feel like a lie waiting to be dissected. Her eyes flicked up constantly, measuring, calculating. Sometimes, I caught her glance lingering too long, as if she was weighing my silence, my hesitation, my very breath. I found myself studying her the way she once studied me, noticing the slight twitch of her mouth when she thought I wasn't paying attention, the way her fingers drummed softly on the table when she was impatient, the small, almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes when I spoke about anything remotely emotional. It was as if she was always on guard, always gauging the boundaries. I wondered if I'd ever really known her, or if this had been some performance all along. The photo had shattered the illusion, and now every gesture felt like a coded message. Later, on the couch, the television flickered, casting moving shadows across her face. I tried to focus on the show, but my mind was elsewhere. On that day, I'd never imagined she was here, in my house, when everything fell apart. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on me, making the room shrink. She leaned against me, her hand warm and familiar, but instead of comfort, it ignited a confusion so deep I could barely breathe. I wanted to pull away, but the part of me that loved her, that still craved her presence, clung desperately to the warmth. When we went to bed, the silence between us was thick and suffocating. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the photo in my mind. She shifted beside me, her breath steady and even. I felt a pang of longing, a desperate hope for the woman I thought I knew, mixed with a growing fear of what she might have been hiding all along. Was she the person I loved? Or was she something else entirely? The question gnawed at me, a battle raging silently in the dark. I caught myself holding back, afraid that any word, any glance, might unravel us completely. Yet the fear wasn't just about what she might say or do. It was about what I might discover in myself. Was I strong enough to face the truth? Or would the love that still clung to her memories become my undoing? The tension between fear and attachment twisted inside me like a storm, relentless and raw. Under this roof, where we had built a life together, I now felt like a stranger in my own home. Every smile she offered seemed rehearsed, every touch a test. And as I lay there, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing, I realized that the war wasn't just between us. It was inside me. The part of me that knew, and the part that hoped, and the part that was already breaking apart. I chose the evening, after the kids were asleep and the house had fallen into that fragile quiet where words could still carry weight. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the dim light casting long shadows on the walls. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photograph. Its edges worn, the image grainy but unmistakable. I slid it across the table toward her without a word. Her eyes flicked down to the photo, then slowly met mine. There was no surprise there, no flicker of shock. Instead, her gaze held a steady, almost clinical calm, like she'd been waiting for this moment all along. I watched the faint rise and fall of her chest, the way her fingers twitched at the edge of the table, as if bracing herself. "I need to know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Were you there? That day?" She nodded, slow and deliberate. "Yes," she said simply. Her admission hit me like a cold wave. The room seemed to shrink around me, the air thickening with tension. I waited, heart pounding, for the storm I expected, the anger, the denial, the excuses. But she just sat there, calm and composed, as if explaining the weather. "It wasn't what you think," she began. Her voice was steady, measured, almost detached. "Your mother, she was dangerous that day, not just to me but to herself, to everyone. I didn't want it to happen. I never wanted it. But she was slipping, losing control. I was there because I was trying to help, but things spiraled." I swallowed hard, struggling to keep my rage in check. "Help? You call this help?" I gestured to the photo, the frozen moment of chaos and pain. She met my gaze evenly. "It was self-defense. An accident, yes, but one that I couldn't avoid. She was hurting herself, and when I tried to stop her, it turned violent. I didn't set out to hurt her. But when you're faced with that kind of desperation, you do what you have to do to survive, to protect yourself." Her words twisted in my gut, a cold rationality that made my skin crawl. This wasn't the rant of a villain or the sobbing confession of a guilt-ridden soul. It was a clear-eyed, unflinching statement of fact, delivered without remorse. She believed in her version of that day, and that belief made it all the more terrifying. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not the woman I married, but the person at the center of my deepest trauma. The realization crashed over me like a wave. Every moment, every memory we'd shared, every tear and every smile, was tangled up with this truth I'd been blind to. My mind raced, torn between anger, grief, and a numb kind of horror. How had I missed this? How had I married the person who stood there when my mother died? The person who carried that secret like a shadow between us, silent but ever present. And yet, beneath the shock, a darker thought took root. Nothing about my life with her had been an accident. The coincidences, the unspoken tensions, the carefully guarded silences. They were all part of a design I hadn't seen until now. I swallowed the lump in my throat and exhaled slowly. The house felt colder, the silence heavier. I realized that whatever I decided next, stay, leave, or expose, I could no longer pretend the past wasn't here, sitting across from me, calm and unyielding. After I confronted her and heard everything laid bare, the room seemed to shrink, like the walls themselves were closing in on a truth I wasn't ready to hold. The full weight of it pressed down on me. Not just the betrayal, but the cruel irony that the person I had trusted most, the one who had comforted me after losing my mother, was also the one who had quietly unraveled the life I thought I knew. It was as if I'd been grieving my mother all over again, only this time the grief was tangled with shock and disbelief, layered with a sense of being utterly unmoored. I didn't go to the police right away. The legal steps felt like a distant echo compared to the immediate raw ache inside. For days, I wandered through the house, haunted by the quiet spaces where laughter used to live. My family, once a source of strength, fractured under the weight of the revelation. Some couldn't believe it. Others couldn't bear to face the truth. I found myself isolated, not just by their disbelief, but because I was trapped in a private war between love and betrayal. The people I expected to hold me together were struggling to process that the woman I married, the one who knew exactly how to make me feel safe, had been the architect of my deepest pain. Eventually, I did take steps to protect myself legally, but that part, while necessary, was secondary to the emotional aftermath. The hardest part is grieving not only the loss of my mother, but also the loss of the marriage that had been a sanctuary, however fragile. I keep replaying moments, searching for signs I missed, wondering how the person who offered comfort could simultaneously be the source of destruction. It's a cruel paradox, how the most dangerous people aren't faceless strangers lurking in the dark, but the ones who walk in through the front door, carrying exactly what you think you need. Now, life feels quieter, emptier, but also strangely clearer. The shadows in my mind have settled enough for me to start piecing together what comes next. It's a slow process, and healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to live with a deeper understanding of pain, trust, and the masks people wear. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that sit closest to home, staring back at you from across the kitchen table. If you want to hear more stories like this, dark, tangled, and real, stay with me here under the same roof. There's a lot more beneath the surface, and sometimes the most unsettling tales are the ones that happen where we least expect them.